Canada, and I'll ask our wonderful chorus over there, which is Stuart, my wife Sharon,
Stuart.
and Joanne, of course.
Okay.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see beyond the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
And will I have you standing? To the King's Head Canada. My wife always tells me when I'm singing I should never stand with a microphone, so that's why I stepped away. But yes, please sit down and we'll carry on.
Right into the microphone.
Is it okay? That's fine. I just want to note a few distinguished people that we have present here today. Joe Preston, Mayor of St. Thomas. Mike Wallace, who is former MP from Burlington. He's welcome in a minute. Jerry Provost, City Councilor. Steve Lehman, I saw Steve coming in. There he is at the same table. Vaughn Miner, city person from way back. And of course, Michael is here, Chong is here with us, but also he brought family members. So Carrie and Alistair are with us. And with that, I think we are ready to proceed with lunch. Why don't we start with the head table? So please go and get your lunch, and then we're going to work backwards from there.
Welcome to Southwestern Ontario. Good region name. You've just become a better man.
When we sit down and hear I say shut up, we'll get things going. I have to introduce someone who will introduce Michael Chong. Because I'm doing this because it reflects positively on me, as you might all will come to understand. David Wood, who is on the faculty at Ivy, will be doing Michael's introduction. David's family is from Guelph, and so there's a long association there, and I'm sure we'll get a wonderful introduction and lots of insight into Michael and his family from David's intro. But my claim to fame is that when I was associate dean for faculty, I hired David Wood. And I put that in the plus category, and I must say every faculty hired was not in the plus category, but David definitely does. So, David, please, take it forward.
Thank you, Rod. I'm delighted to hear I'm in your good books for once, so that's thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Michael Chong. For some of you that don't know Michael's origin story, let me tell you a bit about him. He was born in, you got your superhero status now, he's an origin story. But born in Windsor, grew up in Fergus, where he still lives today with his family. Carrie is here, as you know, and their middle son, Alistair, is here. By the way, Alistair, welcome to Western and welcome to Ivy. Grew up in Fergus and has been a part of that community for a long time. He's a son of two immigrants. His father was from Hong Kong, his mother was from the Netherlands. His parents both died when Michael was quite young. And rather than wallow in his own sorrow, he redirected his energy towards serving his community. Has been an MP for Wellington County and the Fergus area for 22 years now. And I knew him when he became an MP about 20 years ago. So I've known him for most of his time in Parliament and delighted to be able to call him a friend as well. Someone that I respect and admire. He was a member of the cabinet under Prime Minister Harper. He has been the shadow cabinet now for a number of years in opposition, and more recently has been in the position of the critic for foreign affairs and the vice chair. Wow, I've been told I'm not loud enough. Let's speak in the microphone. I will do my best. Also vice chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I can't think of a more important position than that right now with everything that's going on in the world. Michael's someone who has been an advocate for business, been an advocate for our economy and for Canada, has been certainly someone who appreciates and understands farming, the world of agriculture, as well as the importance of immigration and doing immigration right. He's been someone that has stood up for the rights of not just Canadians, but people around the world, and has paid a price for that. He's been sanctioned by Russia for his support of the Ukrainian government. He has faced some difficult challenges from the Chinese intelligence agency on a campaign against his family for standing up for the rights of the Uyghur people in China. He is someone that is incredible integrity and has served this country well, both here and abroad. And so it's my pleasure to introduce you to the Honourable Michael Chong.
So Michael, welcome. We are going to do sort of an interview Q&A format, just to keep it a little less, more informal than perhaps we typically do, and Michael's been agreeable to that. So Michael, I don't know if you recall, but last time you were here speaking to us was the day after Putin's Ukraine incursion war, call it what you will, began. Now we have another war. It's been on for 4 or 5 weeks now with Trump's Iran war. I wonder if you could talk to us a bit, particularly with your foreign affairs expertise, and what you see as the long-term implications of that for the Western order, and then maybe follow up with, is there any role Canada can play in helping resolve the whole Iran situation? I know it's very fluid. There's a so-called ceasefire in place, which doesn't really seem to be a ceasefire. But can you speak to us to that?
Sure, Rod. In some ways the world has changed a lot. In some ways it hasn't changed at all. But first, let me thank you for hosting me and Carrie and Alistair here today. I'm delighted to be here with Mike Wallace and with Joe Preston as well, my two former colleagues in the House of Commons. And thank you all for coming out. But yeah, my comment would be, here I was 4 years ago talking about a war between an authoritarian state, the Russian Federation, and a fledgling democracy, Ukraine. And here we are 4 years later, and that war is still going on, and now we have a second war that's broken out in the Middle East. And so I think this is, a part of a rising clash between authoritarianism that is asserting itself and democracies. I think it's also a product of democracies that are under great strain internally. We know some of the challenges that the democracy to the south of us is facing. Democracies in Europe are facing similar unrest. And so it's a very unsettling time. And I think, maybe what we're starting to live through is a bit of what our grandparents' generation lived through in the first half of the 20th century, where things are very, very unsettled. But, I think there's a critical role that Canada can play. It's the same one that I outlined 4 years ago. It's clear that what's under threat, not just 4 years ago with Russia's attack on Ukraine, but the war in the Middle East, is a reliable, secure source of energy for our closest allies and partners. And just when we were driving in here, David Wood was pulling into the parking lot, and I think the price of gas is $1.86 or $8.87 a liter. Diesel is well above $2 a liter. Energy is becoming a real issue. And so if we want to play our part to secure defense and security for the Western Alliance, for our closest allies and partners, we've got to get Canadian energy to our allies. And I think that's become even more critical now than it was 4 years ago. And I think that's the single biggest role we can play to help Canadian allies and partners, to help secure peace and prosperity throughout the world.
Great, thank you for that. I have to ask you the Donald Trump question at this point. Mark Carney made quite a splash at Davos by saying, really, the United States isn't a reliable ally for a whole variety of reasons, and that Canada needs to forge relationships with other middle powers. Is that where you come out on this equation, or are you someplace different?
I'm in a very different place. Since 1945, we've lived in a world where what policy experts call the rules-based international order. And what that means is that we live in a world that is made up of multilateral institutions and international laws that were all established after 1945. And these are institutions like the NATO alliance, like the United Nations, like the World Trade Organization, like the International Criminal Court, the the International Court of Justice, and a whole bunch of international law that was established around those institutions. That's all post-1945. And that system, while it has not been perfect, has ensured the greatest period of peace and prosperity in millennia. Before 1945, the world was a much poorer, much more brutal, and much nastier place to live. There was bloodshed on a scale that is hard to comprehend for people alive today. I think our grandparents well understood it, which is why they all came together in the 1945 to 1950 period and said, enough of this chaos, we need to establish this rules-based system. And just to, before I go on about critiques of Mr. Carney's speech in Davos, let me just say this. Before 1945, in just the 50-year period alone between 1900 and 1945, in a planet of about a billion and a half people, over 100 million people died in war. Since 1945, we now live in a planet of some 7 billion people, and a fraction of that has passed away, has been killed in war. A fraction of that. I don't know the exact number, but it would be probably in the low tens of millions, even though the planet now has 7 billion people. And before 1945, by the way, having worked at Ivy, you know this data. Before 1945, something like 2/3 of the planet, 80% of the planet, lived in extreme poverty. In other words, on less than $1.88 a day. And today, even though there's 7 billion people on the planet, in absolute numbers, fewer people live in extreme poverty. The World Bank estimates about 800 million people or so. 1/7 the population rather than 3/4. And the world is rapidly reducing those numbers as each decade passes. So it's not just a trite thing to say. We live in a world of relative peace and prosperity that we've never seen since 1945, all thanks to the rules-based system. Well, Mr. Carney said in Davos, the rules-based system is over. What he actually said was that there's been a rupture, and that this rules-based system is effectively over, and that what we need to replace it with is a realism that great powers will do what they want. In other words, might makes right, and it doesn't matter what multilateralism and multilateral institutions and international law say. We'll let them do what they want, throw their weight around using their military force. And for middle powers like Canada, we need to band together in alliances. Well, I think that's a very dangerous path to go down. I think we have to fight to stand up for the rules-based system. It's not perfect. Sometimes great powers will thumb their nose at the rules, but it's the only system we have, and we've got to fight to protect it and fight to improve it. And so I fundamentally disagree with his view, and I also disagree with him suggesting that that he used the analogy of the sign in the window, that the rules-based system was this sign in the window that workers of the world unite, and that this was a symbol of the rules-based system. The rules-based system nobody really believed in. It was always a bit of a facade.
We can no longer rely on the United States to lead the Western-based international rules-based order. Therefore, we have to recognize that reality. I don't know whether you agree with that or not. We can still talk about whether Donald Trump's an aberration. I think we probably agree he's not the best leader for a Western international rules-based international order. I'll take that as an affirmative.
Yeah, I agree with that part of his speech. I agree that we can no longer rely on the United States to assure our defense and security, to lead the West in terms of trade liberalization and the like. I think that era is clearly over, and so we need to start, banding together on our own to build these kinds of alliances. But I would say that these alliances. We don't need to build these alliances. I should be tighter in my language. We need to stand on our own 2 feet in a way that we have not over the last number of decades. I don't think we need to create new alliances, middle power alliances. We already have those. NATO is a middle power alliance. There are about 28 member states of NATO. 27 of them are middle powers, right? They're not the United States. They're countries like Canada, the Netherlands, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and the like. We have middle power alliances through trade agreements. We've negotiated the Trans-Pacific Partnership with about a dozen countries, including Canada and other countries in the Indo-Pacific region, like Malaysia, Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand. We've got a middle power alliance with the European Union. We've negotiated a free trade agreement with them. So there are lots of middle power alliances that we have already. We now need to start using them and leveraging them. And that's where I think what we need to focus on, rather than trying to expand the number of alliances we have. We have plenty of alliances right now.
Great, thank you for that. Just to follow on, to move off of kind of foreign policy or into domestic policy. So the Liberal Party has both, I think, in policy and perhaps even with people, has moved from left of center to more right of center. Mark Carney is probably a right of center. It's hard to tell, but probably right of center. Tim Hodgson, people like that. In the party, and certainly a lot of the policies, axing the tax, that came right out of the Conservatives' playbook. He's talking a good game on major infrastructure spending and getting regulation out of the way and that kind of thing, increasing defense spending, all of those kinds of things. Again, really out of the Conservative Party of Canada's playbook. That's the political reality we confront. There's not, I would argue, as much difference as there used to be between the two parties' positions, not because the Conservatives have changed, but because the Liberals have. Kind of two-part question to that. One is the implications for the Conservative Party of Canada, both in terms of policy and people, and we do seem to be losing a few people. You can speak to that too if you'd like. I'm sure people would like to hear your views on that. And then to policy is, how do we differentiate ourselves, or do we? Maybe we accept that, hey, those were good policies, you adopted them, let's go forward and see where we'll serve the role of opposition and criticize when it's appropriate. But just that whole move of the Liberal Party and how the Conservative Party of Canada kind of reacts to that, addresses that, adapts to that.
Well, that's a great observation. I think it's an accurate one. Look, I'd say that the Carney government has adopted a number of conservative policies. For example, they've cut the consumer-facing carbon tax. They've massively increased, they're in the process of massively increasing defense spending to meet our 2% target as part of the NATO alliance. They've also took our idea of cutting income taxes. They cut the lowest marginal income tax bracket that was at 15% down to below that level. So they've taken some of our ideas and implemented them, and credit to them for doing that. But those ideas in themselves are not going to fundamentally address the broader challenge our economy is facing. As you know, 2 of the last 3 quarters have been negative. Our economy has shrunk. In the second quarter of last year and in the fourth quarter of last year, our economy shrunk. If those 2 quarters had been back to back, we would be in a recession. The economy continues to exhibit sluggishness. So those little things they've done to date that we suggested, kudos to them for doing it, but at the end of the day, it's not enough to turn things around. Rhetorically, Mr. Carney has adopted a much more right-of-center stance on the economy. But I think what remains to be seen is whether or not they can execute on that rhetoric to achieve the fundamental changes that our economy needs to get us back on track. Which leads me to answer the final part of your question, which is how can we differentiate ourselves from the Liberals? Well, quite simply, my view is that the actions Mr. Carney has taken to date are not sufficient to turn our economic fortunes around. What we need is 4 or 5 buckets of major reforms to our economy to actually get it going. So the first bucket, I would say, is we need regulatory reform. We did pass Bill C-5 last June, which was the Building Better Canada Act, which gave the Prime Minister enormous powers to expedite the approval of any project they've deemed in the national interest. But the government has not yet introduced legislation to reform all the underlying regulations, because the power that he has right now, first of all, it's a bit of a bottleneck. To date, he's not approved a single new project. And secondly, these powers expire in about 5 years, and we're back to the old system. So we need fundamental reform to the way we approach regulation in Canada to simplify things, to speed up the process so that we can actually get things done in this country. The second bucket, I would say, is competition reform. We've got an economy that many experts of business schools and many economists have said is highly uncompetitive. We've got oligopoly type competition in transportation, in banking, in telecommunications, and other major sectors of the economy that is imposing high costs on consumers and making it more difficult for our economy to be productive. The third bucket is we need major tax reform. The last time we had major tax reform, you'd have to go back to 1986 when the Mulroney government collapsed taxes from 10 federal brackets down to 3, or 1971 coming out of the Carter Commission. We need a complete overhaul of our corporate and personal income tax system. It's become too unwieldy and is forcing, either dissuading investors from investing in plant capital and equipment, or it's putting a damper on income growth because people are taxed so heavily on income. And then the other thing we need to do is we need to put the federal government on a fiscally sustainable track. The current Carney government's deficits are double what the previous Trudeau government's deficits were. We're now on track to having an $80 billion deficit, and there's the deficits projected over the next 4 years or so, 5 years, are actually going to be double than what Chrystia Freeland, who was finance minister, had projected just over a year ago. So we're not on a fiscally sustainable track. 3 provinces got downgraded in the last month, BC, Quebec, and Nova Scotia. And so these are the fundamental reforms that I think we need to do. I'm waiting for Mr. Carney to potentially introduce reforms in this area, but to date he hasn't done it. And so that's where the Conservative Party can play a role to say, look, we need more ambition on economic policy. because of the track we're on, the economy is not going to turn around.
To follow up and move off of the policies and
Yeah.
onto the politics a
Yes.
bit more. So we have this movement right of center, Liberal Party. I assume that probably, I'm not that plugged into the Liberal Party, but I assume that creates an internal dynamic that is a bit problematic to manage because you've got this right of center movement and you have a left of center base in your party. So that must be creating some issues. Right now, he seems to be managing it very well. You don't hear a lot, at least publicly, about that. But it also seems to have created problems for the Conservative Party of Canada in that we've had a number of crossing of the aisle.
Yep.
I won't call them defections because I think that characterizes them in a way that maybe they shouldn't be characterized. I don't know. Can you speak to both of those, the problems that it may be causing the Liberals, and can they really sustain that right of center position?
Overhanging fruit is the European Union. They want our natural gas. We're the 5th largest producer of natural gas in the world. Right now, we're selling it to the Americans for $3 per million BTU. They're loading it, compressing it, and loading it on tanker ships as LNG and selling it for 3 times that price to the Europeans. Like, we should be doing that. We should be shipping our gas to the East Coast, compressing it, putting it on LNG tankers, for example, at the Port of St. John, where there's already an existing facility that could be expanded, and selling it to the Europeans and getting 3 times the price for it. The German Chancellor came here, the previous German Chancellor, Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and asked us for gas, and we told them there was no business case. And then, you know what happened? The Germans signed long-term contracts with Qatar. And that was in 2022, 2023. Well, what's happened? We have a war in the Middle East, and Qatari gas fields have been bombed by the Iranians, and they can't get the gas out of Qatar. So again, here we are 4 years later. Let's seize the moment. The Prime Minister should use his immense powers under the national interest designation to designate gas pipelines to the East Coast to get built and to get our gas to German markets. This is the opportunity. The Germans would gladly take our gas. And look, I'm passionate about this because I've lived this for 4 years. When Russia attacked Ukraine, and I was here 4 years ago, within the following 4 weeks, 4 weeks after I came here, the German government approved the construction of number of new pipelines and 6 LNG import facilities in the North and Baltic Seas in order to displace Russian gas that had been coming in via the Nord Stream pipeline. So they realized that they had to cut off Russian gas, they needed replacement gas. So they built the first LNG terminal from approval to construction in 194 days. Do you know what takes a year? 10 to 15 years, right? And so here we are 4 years later, and we still have no major projects approved. We need to get these projects approved. It would give an immediate boost to our economy. And the head of Enbridge just went on Bloomberg television in New York, I believe, just a couple of days ago, and made that exact case. He said, we're willing, ready, and able to do this. We just need the government to approve the things and to get out of the way. So that's the low-hanging fruit. I'd much rather the government send the Minister of Finance and all these finance types to Germany to talk about how we're going to build and finance this project, rather than to Beijing to do the same thing.
Great, thank you for that. I have one other question area for you, and then if we have a few minutes left, maybe we can get a question or two from the audience. But parliamentary reform. I know this is an area near and dear to your heart, and you've had some, I will qualify it as a limited success in your history some time ago. Is that just a dead issue now? Is anybody looking at that, or is there support for that anywhere in the current political scheme of things?
So I agree with your assessment. We need to do much more on parliamentary reform. Is there a willingness for reform right now? There is discussions going on in the House about it. We'll see where they go. Every parliament, there's a group of MPs, particularly a new crop of MPs, that say this isn't working the way it should be. There's an MP from Calgary, a newly elected Liberal MP from Calgary, who's made the case that things need to be improved. particularly in question period. I'm not sure there's an appetite in the House at large to do this yet. I think if there is, we should seize it. My view is that there's 3 or 4 easy things we could do that would be very procedurally easy to do, that would fundamentally build on the reforms that I introduced about 10 years ago. So, I think the first thing we need to do, I think, and this is something that former Liberal MP and Speaker Milliken has long argued for, is we got to get rid of the list system. And Mike and Joe know what I'm talking about. In the Canadian House of Commons, in order to speak on the floor of the House, you need to effectively go through somebody designated by your leader to get on a list to speak in the House. And that list system often is used to favor some members over others and to exclude other members from speaking. And so what effectively has happened is the Speaker has lost the right of recognition in the House of Commons, which is unique to Canada. If you go to the UK Parliament, the Australian House of Representatives, the New Zealand Parliament, the Speaker still retains the right, the decision-making as to who gets to speak on the floor of the House. And so I think we got to get rid of the list system and replace it with a system that we once had before the 1980s, which is the Speaker decides who gets to speak on the floor of the House, so that more members have a chance to speak and that their constituents' voice can be heard through their elected member. I think the other thing we could change is we should get rid of the power of the leader to appoint committee chairs and committee members. So the House of Commons has about 24 standing committees. Half the work we do is not on the floor of the House, but in the standing committees of the House of Commons. And there's about 10 members on each committee. There's 10 members on each committee, and one of the 10 becomes chair. Currently, the party leaders and the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition decide who the chairs are. 4 for the Leader of the Opposition to choose, and 20 or so for the Prime Minister to choose. And then the party leaders effectively appoint the 10 members to committees. So I think we should get rid of that system, and we should introduce the reform that the UK Parliament introduced about 15 years ago, where we go to a secret ballot election of both committee members and committee chairs. And that reduces the power of party leaders, particularly the Prime Minister, to control committees, and makes committees a place where governments are held accountable, not the other way around. Another change is I think we should change the Board of Internal Economy, which is the powerful, secretive, administrative body of the House of Commons, which is currently effectively controlled by the Prime Minister, because he effectively appoints the majority of members to the Board of Internal Economy. I think the board should be made up of backbench members elected by their peers in the House of Commons. And, again, another change that I would suggest is, we need to take a look at making sure that, the rules, the question period rules are changed. Like, it's become a rhetorical theater rather than actually a venue for getting real questions and answers done. So those are some of the changes. Very easy to do procedurally. Just take a motion to enact most of these changes, but I'm not sure the political will is there to do it.
And would that be the political will on either side of the aisle?
Yes.
I'm just checking our time, and I know, Mike, we have to finish on time, so I'm going to invite you up now to thank Michael, and hopefully you can stay around for a few minutes if any members of the audience have questions for you.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Michael. Thanks. I told Michael he's told to make the last word today. So, Mike and I served together in the Harper government with Joe, and it just, you can tell by his in-depth knowledge of whatever he's saying. He's well-researched, he's intelligent, he gives a really significant answer. He's not fluff at all. I can, what happens in caucus stays in caucus, of course, but just to give you an idea, there'll be lots of members up to the microphone you kind of not really pay much attention to, but when Michael Chong got to the microphone to talk about whatever the issue was, the room was quiet. They paid attention to what they did. Now, what do you say? You don't always agree. I just got to tell you, I was on that list that he was talking about a lot of times. And I was also chair of the Justice Committee, appointed by the Prime Minister. So we may not agree on it. The fun fact about Mike and I, At the end, they're called sessions, one in the fall, one in the winter, summer. At the end of the session, Mike and I would usually go out and see what's available at different bars around the town and argue, because we love to argue about issues. We had some fundamental disagreements on things, but the one thing that's hard to argue with Mike because he's so well researched. We want, on behalf of the Macdonald Cartier Club today, I know this is just back again. We hope to have you in the future. It was an excellent discussion. We really appreciate your insight, and we want to thank you for coming again. Thank you very much.
Thanks. It was wonderful. I like that.
With that, we are adjourned.
Those are great format.